I need to tell you about the night everything came undone, but I have to go back a little first. I'm 23 years old, and I live alone in my grandmother's house at 14 Wren Hollow Lane in Carrollton, Oregon. Grandma Margaret died 3 years ago and left it to me. Before that, I lived here with her. Before that, I lived in Portland with my mom and my brother. Before that, there was a father, but he left when I was 6, and I don't have anything else to say about him. The house has an attic. The attic has a violin, a laptop, a desk, and a chair that doesn't match anything. That's where I've spent most of the last 7 years. Not performing, not playing for anyone, just composing, recording. 47 pieces, all saved in a folder on my laptop. I named them things like November Rain on the Porch and 4 a.m. and the Furnace Clicks On. Stupid titles, private titles, they were mine. My brother Jonah is 28. He teaches history at a high school in Ashford, about 40 minutes east. He calls every Sunday. Sometimes I pick up, sometimes I let it ring and call back on Monday when I feel less like a person he has to worry about. My neighbor, Mrs. Klein, Dorothea Klein, 74, waves at me when I get the mail. Some weeks she's the only person I see in the flesh. That's the shape my life was, small and quiet and mine. On a Tuesday night in November it was raining. I'd been recording for hours. I was tired in that deep, used-up way where your eyes burn and your fingers ache, and you feel almost peaceful because you've emptied yourself out. I closed my laptop, or I thought I did. I think I just dimmed the screen. There was an old streaming account linked to it from when I was 15, from my competition days, back when someone else managed all of that for me. I hadn't thought about it in years. I didn't even know the login. But the laptop remembered. Some auto-sync setting I never turned off uploaded my entire folder. All 47 compositions. Just pushed them out into the world while I slept with my head on the desk and rain running down the window behind me. By morning, a music blogger named Felix Crane had found them. He wrote a thread calling them, I can't say it without feeling sick, the most devastating violin recordings made this century. The thread went viral. People shared it. Then more people shared it. Then it wasn't a thread anymore. It was a wave I couldn't see because I was still asleep. I woke up to 19 missed calls from Jonah. 19. My brother, who calls once a week like clockwork, had called me 19 times in one night, and my email, an account I never check tied to a name I stopped using, had thousands of notifications. I sat there in the attic with my phone in my hand, and I didn't understand yet. Not really. I just knew that something had happened, and that the small, quiet life I'd built to survive in was already gone. Within 48 hours, the recordings had over 12 million streams. I know that number because Jonah told me. I wasn't counting. I wasn't doing anything except sitting in the attic with the curtains drawn, trying to breathe normally and failing. Journalists came to Carrollton, a town of 4,000 people, and there were strangers with cameras on Wren Hollow Lane. I watched them from the upstairs window like they were a species I didn't recognize. One of them rang the doorbell. I sat on the floor of the hallway and waited until they left. Jonah drove from Ashford. He found me in the attic, hyperventilating, and he sat behind me and put his hands on my shoulders and said, Hey, we're going to fix this. We tried. We logged into the old streaming account. It took an hour just to recover the password, and we pulled everything down. But it was already everywhere. Re-uploads, mirrors. People had saved the files. You can't take something back from the internet, you just can't. A record label called Vellum Music Group, based in Los Angeles, started emailing through my old competition contacts. Their A&R person, a woman named Sandra Chen, wrote to me every single day. Polite, persistent, I didn't read any of it. And then people figured out who I was. The prodigy who disappeared. The girl who fell apart on national television at the Hargrove Young Artists Showcase in Portland when she was 16. Old footage surfaced. You could watch me, this skinny kid in a black dress, freeze on stage, then gasp, then start shaking so hard the bow clattered on the floor. Millions of people watched that clip. Comment sections turned into wars. Some people called me a genius. Others picked my breakdown apart frame by frame like it was entertainment. Mrs. Klein brought soup one evening. Tomato. She set it on the counter and sat at the kitchen table with me and didn't say anything. She just sat there. I don't think I've ever been more grateful for another person's silence. Jonah kept pushing. You have to say something, Elle. You have to get ahead of this. I told him no. I told him I had nothing to say. I hadn't touched my violin since the upload. The attic was so quiet it made my teeth ache. Then, on day 7, a journalist published a long article, a deep dive. She'd connected the date of the Hargrove breakdown to the date of my mother's death. Lillian Voss, my mom, killed in a car accident on Route 34 the same night I collapsed on stage. The article speculated about the link. It laid it all out like a theory to be examined. I read it on my phone in the kitchen, and I picked up a glass from the counter and threw it against the wall. The sound it made was the most honest thing I'd heard in days. Just glass breaking, clear and sharp and done. Then I stood there barefoot with wet eyes, looking at the pieces on the tile floor, and I thought, the thing I have never said out loud to anyone is now something strangers are discussing in comment sections. I left the glass where it was. I went upstairs. I closed the attic door. 2 weeks after the upload, I answered one of Sandra Chen's emails. I didn't want a deal. I didn't want to talk about music. I wrote, "How do I make this stop?" She wrote back within an hour. She said she understood. She said she'd like to meet if I was open to it. No pressure, no contract, just a conversation. She flew from Los Angeles to Carradine the next day. We met at a coffee shop on Millbrook Street. She was 35, calm, well-dressed in a way that made me feel like a ghost in a flannel shirt. I expected a pitch. I expected her to try to sell me on something. Instead, she stirred her coffee and said, "You can't unring this bell, but you can decide what the bell means." I didn't know what to do with that. I went home and sat with it for days. Sandra didn't push. She texted once to say she was staying in town for the week if I wanted to talk again. That was it. During those days, I made the mistake, or maybe not a mistake, I still don't know, of looking at what people were saying about my music online. Not the news articles, not the comment sections. I found a forum, a community. People who had been listening to my recordings and writing to each other about what they felt. One post stopped me cold. A man in Glasgow, a widower. He wrote that his wife had died 4 months earlier, and that he'd been listening to my piece, November Rain on the Porch, every night before bed. He said it was the only thing that made him feel like someone understood what he was going through. He said he didn't know who I was or what had happened to me, but he wanted me to know that whatever pain made that music, it had reached him. And it mattered. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and sat on my grandmother's couch and cried for 2 hours. I'm not exaggerating. 2 hours. I didn't fully understand why at first. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was this terrible, confusing feeling that something I made in the dark, for no one, had found someone. That my private grief had traveled across an ocean and sat beside a stranger while he missed his wife. I don't know how to explain what that does to you. It's not comforting. It's terrifying. Because it means your pain isn't just yours anymore. And maybe it shouldn't be. I agreed to one interview, a podcast called The Honest Room, hosted by a woman named Maren Ashby, recorded remotely so I could sit in the attic with headphones on and no one could see my hands shaking. I talked about my mom, about the attic, about guilt. I didn't perform. I didn't play a single note. But at one point, Maren asked why I composed and my voice cracked and I said, I wrote those pieces because I couldn't say the words. I never meant for anyone to hear them. But maybe the words needed to be heard. The episode became the most downloaded podcast of the month. I hung up the call and sat there in the quiet and thought, what have I done? After the podcast, everything got louder. My inbox filled with interview requests, collaboration offers from people I'd never heard of, hundreds, then thousands, of messages from strangers telling me about their dead parents, their grief, their loneliness. Every one of them wanted something from me. I don't mean that cruelly. They wanted connection, but I could barely hold my own pain. I couldn't hold theirs too. And then came the cruelty. A YouTube channel, one of those tabloid ones that feeds on tearing people apart, posted a video called Prodigy or Fraud, the Alara Voss Myth. They questioned whether my breakdown at the Hargrove Showcase was staged, whether my compositions were even original. They used that clip of me shaking on stage and put a laughing emoji over it. I watched the whole thing. I don't know why, I watched it twice. After that, I stopped eating regularly. Not on purpose. I just forgot. Or I'd stand in front of the open fridge and feel nothing and close it again. I tried to compose in the attic, but everything that came out was grinding and ugly and wrong. I'd play a few bars and then put the violin down and cry. Then pick it up and try again, then cry again. Jonah drove from Ashford on a Saturday. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, gently, carefully, "Elle, I think you should talk to someone. A therapist." I lost it. I stood up and shouted at him. I said I didn't need to be fixed. I said I was fine. I said he should stop treating me like a project. The look on his face, I still think about that look. He didn't yell back. He just picked up his keys and left. Mrs. Klein came by the next day with a loaf of bread, and I told her through the closed door that I wanted to be alone. I heard her set the bread on the porch. I heard her footsteps going back down the path. I didn't open the door. Sandra Chen arranged a dinner. Quiet place, her hotel in Ashford. I almost didn't go, but I went. We sat across from each other with plates of food I barely touched, and Sandra looked at me and said, "You opened a door. You can walk through it, or you can stand in the doorway and let it crush you." And something in me just broke open. I told her. The real thing. The thing underneath everything. My mom called me while she was driving to Portland that night. I was backstage at the Hargrove Showcase mid-panic attack, gasping, and her name lit up my phone. She was calling to say she was coming, and I screamed at her. I screamed, "Stop calling me, just stop!" And she, Lillian, my mom, she probably looked at her phone again after I hung up. Moments before the accident on Route 34. I said that out loud in a restaurant to a woman I'd known for 5 weeks. I said, I screamed at my dying mother to stop calling me. Sandra didn't tell me it wasn't my fault. She didn't say anything reassuring. She just looked at me and let it be what it was. That night, in the parking lot of the hotel, I sat in my car and called a therapist in Ashford, Dr. Nina Patel. I booked an appointment for the following Wednesday. My hands were still shaking when I hung up. Dr. Patel's office was on Cedar Park Drive in Ashford. Small building, second floor, a window that looked out over a parking lot. Not beautiful. Not meaningful. Just a room where I went every Wednesday for 3 months and took myself apart. I don't want to make therapy sound like some clean process. It wasn't. I sat in that chair and said terrible things about myself, and sometimes Dr. Patel pushed back and sometimes she just let me talk, and some weeks I left feeling worse than when I walked in, but somewhere around month 3, she brought up the police report. I knew the police report existed. I'd seen it once, years ago. It said that my mother's accident on Route 34 was caused by black ice, not by a phone, not by distraction. Black ice on a freezing April night. Lillian's car hit a patch going around a curve, and that was it. I told Dr. Patel I'd never believed the report. She asked me why, and the answer, when I finally said it, was so simple it knocked the wind out of me. If the black ice killed my mother, then her death was random, pointless. Just a terrible thing that happened on a cold road on a cold night. But if I killed her, if my scream made her look at her phone, if my breakdown pulled her onto that highway, then at least it meant something. At least there was a reason, even if the reason was me. I had been choosing guilt over chaos for 7 years, because guilt gave me something to hold, something to organize my grief around. Without it, there was just nothing. A woman driving on ice, a curve in the road, and then she was gone. That was the hardest thing I've ever had to sit with. Harder than the guilt, honestly. The guilt was awful, but it was mine. The randomness belonged to no one. While I was doing this work, slowly, badly, one Wednesday at a time, something was happening out in the world, a movement, I guess you'd call it. People started posting videos of themselves playing my compositions. Amateur musicians, professional ones, kids with school violins, a cellist in Tokyo, a guitarist in Sao Paulo. They used the hashtag #UnPlayForAlara, and they dedicated their performances to people they'd lost, their parents, their friends, their children. I watched dozens of those videos one afternoon on my grandmother's couch. I sobbed, I laughed, I don't know where one ended and the other began. The next day, I went up to the attic. I picked up my violin, not the way I had during those spiral weeks when I'd forced bow to string and hated every sound that came out. This was different. I didn't play a composition, I just improvised. It was messy. I kept stopping and starting. My fingers felt clumsy and slow and the tone was rough, but I wasn't asking the instrument to save me. I was just playing. Jonah came by that evening. He told me later he heard me from the driveway. He sat on the porch steps and listened, and he didn't come inside. He called me that night. His voice sounded thick, like he'd been crying or was about to. He said, "Mom would have loved that one." I whispered, "I know." 6 months after a laptop glitch tore my life open, I agreed to play for people again. Not a concert, not a comeback. One evening at the Carradine Community Auditorium on Birch Street, 200 seats. Sandra helped set it up. No record deal, no press pit, one fixed camera for a live stream, and that was it. I chose 4 pieces, 3 from the original recordings and 1 new one I'd written during therapy. I called it Black Ice in April. The night of the performance, I stood in the wings and I couldn't breathe. It happened fast. 1 second I was fine, nervous, but fine, and the next, my chest locked up and my hands went numb, and I was 16 again, backstage at the Hargrove Young Artists Showcase, and the walls were closing in. I grabbed the edge of a curtain and bent over and tried to count my breaths the way Dr. Patel taught me, but the numbers scattered. Then 2 hands took mine. Mrs. Klein, Dorothea Klein, 74 years old, who had been sitting in the front row. She had somehow walked backstage. Nobody stopped her. Maybe nobody noticed. She stood in front of me in her good cardigan and held my hands and didn't say a single word. She just held on. The shaking stopped. Not all at once. But it stopped. I walked out. The auditorium was full. Every seat. Jonah was in the 3rd row. Dr. Patel was near the back. Sandra stood by the door. 200 people, and the room was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system humming. I stepped up to the microphone. I hadn't planned exactly what to say, but I said this. 7 years ago, I lost my mother and I lost my voice. A few months ago, an accident gave my voice back to me in a way I never chose. I'm still angry about that. I'm still scared, but I'm here. And this time, I choose to be. Then I played. It wasn't perfect. My hand trembled during the second piece, and you could hear it, this faint wobble in the tone that I couldn't smooth out. Between the 3rd piece and the 4th, I paused too long. I just stood there with the bow at my side, staring at the floor, and I almost walked off. Almost, but I played Black Ice in April. I don't know how to describe what it felt like. I wrote that piece about randomness, about a road and a night and ice that didn't care who was driving over it, about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us have no author and no meaning, and how that's the hardest thing in the world to accept. I wrote it about my mom. The room went completely still. Not polite stillness. The kind where 200 people stop shifting in their seats and stop breathing at the same time. When I finished, I didn't bow. I just stood there, holding my violin, breathing. The applause started slowly. 1 person, then a few, then the whole room. I looked at the 3rd row, at Jonah, at the empty seat beside him, the one I'd reserved. No one was sitting in it. I'd asked for it to stay open. For her. For Lillian. There was a single white rose on the seat. Jonah must have placed it there. I nodded. Once. Softly. I don't know what comes next. I really don't. I don't have a plan. I don't have a deal or a tour or a second performance scheduled. I don't know if I'll ever be comfortable with people hearing what I make. I don't know if the panic attacks will stop. I don't know if I'll ever fully let go of the guilt, even though I understand now where it came from and why I held it so tight. But for the first time in 7 years, not knowing feels okay.